Chapter 15 Cassia. At dusk, the evening light gilds the white of the barricade into gold, and the sky is cool and blue except for the spot where the sun burns down beyond the horizon. That's when we gather, more of us each day. One person tells two people, and two tell four, and it increases exponentially. And within a few weeks of beginning, we have what I think of as an outbreak of our own. I don't know who started referring to this place as the gallery, but the name caught on. I'm glad people cared enough to name it. I like it best when I hear the whispers of those who are here for the first time, who stand before the wall with their hands over their mouths and tears in their eyes. Though I could be wrong, I think that many of them feel as I do whenever I come here. I am not alone. If I have a little time and can stay for a while, I show whoever wants to learn how to write. Once they've seen me do it, they make their own marks, clumsy at first, then definite, confident. I teach them printing, not the ornate cursive Kai taught me. Printing is easier because of the separate, distinct lines. It's the joining together, the writing without ceasing, and the continuous movement that is most difficult to learn, that feels so foreign to our hands. Now and then I do write in cursive so I don't lose the feeling of connection to what I am putting down, and more importantly, to Kai. When I write without lifting the stick from the ground or the pencil from the paper, I am reminded of Hunter and his pupil, how they drew the blue lines on their skin and then on to the next person. That's harder, a man says, watching me write in cursive. But the regular way? It's not bad. No, I say. So why haven't we been doing it all along, he says. I think some people have, I say, and he nods. We have to be careful. There are still pockets of society sympathizers who want to fight and destroy, and they can be dangerous. The rising itself hasn't forbidden us to gather like this, but the pilot has asked that everyone focus attention on completing our work and ending the plague. He tells us that saving people is what matters most, and I believe that to be true, but I think we are also saving ourselves here in the gallery. So many people have waited a long time to create or had to hide what they'd done. We bring whatever we've made to the gallery. There are many pictures and poems tacked to the wall with tree sap. They look like tattered flags, paper from ports, napkins, even torn pieces of cloth. There is a woman who carves patterns on pieces of wood and then darkens them with charred ash and presses the woodcuts against paper, imprinting her world on ours. There is a man who must have been an official once, who has taken all his white uniforms and found a way to turn them different colors. He cuts the fabric into pieces and makes clothing in a style different from any I've ever seen, with angles and flourishes and lines that are unexpected and right. He hangs his creations from the top of the gallery, and they look like the promises of who we might be in the future. There is Dalton, who always brings artwork that is beautiful and interesting, fashioned from pieces of other things. Today, she's brought a person created out of bits of cloth and paper torn small, and then remade into something large with stones for eyes and seeds for teeth, and it's beautiful and terrible. Oh, Dalton, I say. She smiles, and I lean in closer for a good look. I smell the tangy scent of the tree sap she uses to hold all the pieces of her creations together. There's a rumor, Dalton says softly, that at dark, someone's going to sing. Are we sure this time? I ask. We've heard the rumor before, but it never seems to happen. Poems and artwork are easier to leave. We don't have to stand before the others and see their faces as we offer up what it is we have to give. Before Dalton can answer, someone is at my elbow. I turn, and there is an archivist. I know. There's an archivist I know. Panic sets in for a moment. How did he find the gallery? Then I remember that the archivists are not the society, and also that we are not competing with the archivists for trades. This is a place of sharing. He pulls something white from the inside of his coat and hands it to me. A piece of paper. Could it be a message from Kai or Xander? What did Xander think of my message? Those were the hardest words I've ever had to write. I begin to open the paper. Don't read it, the archivist says, sounding embarrassed. Not when I'm here. I wondered, could you put it up sometime, after I leave? It's a story I wrote. Of course, I promise him. I'll do it tonight. I shouldn't have assumed that he was only an archivist. Of course, he might have something to add to the gallery, too. People come to us asking if there is any value in what they've made, he says. I have to tell them that there isn't. Not to us. I send them on to you, but I don't know what you call this place. For a moment, I hesitate, and then I remind myself that the gallery isn't a secret. It can't be kept. We call it the gallery, I say. The archivist nods. You should be careful about gathering in groups, he tells me. There are rumors that the plague has mutated. We've heard those rumors for weeks, I say. I know, he says, but someday they could be true. That's why I came tonight. I had to write this down in case we ran out of time. I understand. I have learned that even without a plague or a mutation, time is always short. That's why I had to write those things to Xander, even though it was almost impossible to do. I had to tell him the truth because, since time is short, it should not be spent waiting. I know you love me. I love you, and I always will. But things can't hold like this. They have to break. You say you don't mind that you wait for me, but I think that you do mind, and you should, because we've done too much waiting in our lives, Xander. Don't wait for me anymore. I hope for love for you. I hope for this more than anything else, maybe even more than my own happiness. And in a way, perhaps that means I love Xander best of all. Chapter 16. Kai. Where are we going? Indy asks, climbing into the airship. It's my turn to fly, so I sit in the pilot's seat. No idea, I say, as usual. Once the rising began in earnest, we stopped getting our assignments in advance. I start my equipment check. Indy helps me. An older ship today, she says. Good. I nod in agreement. Indy and I both prefer the older ships, which can be more temperamental than the new ones, but which also have a different feel to them. When you're piloting the new ships, sometimes you feel like they're flying you instead of it being the other way around. Everything is in order, so we wait for our instructions. It's raining again and Indy hums, sounding happy. It makes me smile. It's a good thing to have us flying together, I say. I never see you in the barracks or the meal hall anymore. I've been busy, Indy says. She leans closer to me. After the plague is gone, she asks, Are you going to request to train as a fighter? Is that why I don't see Indy as much? Is she planning on changing jobs someday? The fighters, the ones who cover our errand ships as we fly, had to train for years, and of course they learn to fight and kill. No, I say. What about you? Before she can answer, our flight plans start coming through. Indy reaches for them, but I snatch them away first, and she sticks out her tongue at me like we're kids. I look down at the plans, and my heart misses a beat. What is it? Indy asks, craning her neck so she can see. We're going to Aurea, I say, stunned. That's strange, Indy says. It is. The Rising doesn't like us to pilot into provinces where we once lived. They think we'll want to try to get the cargo to people we know, instead of letting the Rising distribute according to needs. The temptation is too high, the commanders tell us. Well, it could be interesting, Indy says. They say Aurea and Central are the places with the most society sympathizers. I wonder who still lives there that I would know. Cassia's family was sent to Kia, and my parents were taken away. Does M's family still live there? What about the Caros? I haven't seen Xander since the time I gave him the note from Cassia. A few days after I talked with Indy about getting inside the Kama City barricade. The Rising sent us in to deliver some of the cures. I think Indy has something to do with the assignment, but whenever I ask her about it, she shrugs it off. They probably just wanted to see if we could make the landing, she says, since it's one of the most difficult ones in a city. But she's got that glint in her eye that means she's not telling me the whole story. It worries me, but if Indy doesn't want to tell you something, it's pointless to keep asking. But we made it inside the walls and helped Caleb with the cargo, and I delivered Cassia's message. It was good to see Xander again. He was glad to see me too. I wonder how long that lasted, but after he saw that part of the letter was ruined. The main part of the flight is, as usual, all sky. Then we drop lower. I aim the ship in the direction of the barricade. Though it was the society who put up the white barriers, the rising has left them in place for now to keep a line between the sick and the healthy. Aurea looks like everywhere else, Indy says, sounding disappointed. I'd never thought of it that way, but she's right. That was always Aurea's most important characteristic. It was so perfectly society that it was practically anonymous, not like Camas, which has the mountains to set it apart, or Arcadia, who has a rocky shore to the East Sea, or Central with all its lakes. The middle provinces, Aurea and Grandia, Bria and Kia, look pretty much the same, except for one thing. We do have the hill, I tell Indy. You'll see when we get closer. I feel hungry for the sight of that forested rise with its green trees. I feel like if I can't see Cassia, the hill is the next best thing. We stood there together. We hid in the trees, and for the first time, our lips touched. I can almost feel the wind on my skin and her hand in mine. I swallow. But when I soar a circle over Aurea to prepare for landing, I can't seem to find the hill in the dusky light of evening. Indy is the one who sees it. That brown thing? She asks. She's right. That bare brown spot is the hill. I start to bring the ship down. We get closer and closer to the ground. Trees along the streets turn large. The ground rushes at us. The buildings become familiar instead of generic. At the last second, I pull the ship back up. I feel Indy looking at me. I've never done this before, and in the months we've been running in supplies. Landing wasn't right, I say to the speakers. It happens. It will go down on my record as an error, but I have to see the hill again. Closer. We come up in the opposite direction and head for the hill, jumping lower than I should so I can get a good look. Is something wrong? One of the fighters asks over the speaker. No, I say, I'm bringing it in. I've seen what I needed to see. The ground is bare. It's been completely bulldozed, burned, butchered. It's like the hill never knew trees. Parts of the hill have slowed downward, no longer anchored by the roots of living things. The little piece of green silk from Cassia's dress is no longer tied to a tree on the top of the hill, wearing out into white with wind and rain and sun. Our buried scraps of poems have been exhumed and reburied and pushed farther under. They've killed the hill. I land the ship. Behind me, I hear Caleb open the hold and start dragging out the cases. I sit and stare straight ahead. I want to be back there, on the hill, with Cassia. I want it so much, I think it might destroy me. All these months have passed, and we're still apart. I put my head in my hands. Kai? Indy asks. Are you all right? She puts her hand on my shoulder for a second, then she lets go and, without looking at me, goes down to help Caleb. I'm grateful to her for both the touch and the solitude, but neither lasts long. Kai, Indy calls out, come see this. What? I ask, climbing down into the hold. Indy points at a spot near the floor, concealed earlier by the cases. Someone has scratched into the metal of the ship and carved images into the walls. It reminds me of the pictures back in the carving. They're drinking the sky, Indy says. She's right. It's not rain that the picture shows, not like one I drew back in the burrow. It's different. Broken pieces of sky falling to the ground, and people picking them up and tipping water out of them. It makes me thirsty, Indy says. Look, I say, pointing to the figure coming down from the sky. Who do you think this is? The pilot, of course, she says. Did you draw these? I ask Caleb, who's appeared at the top of the hold, ready for more cargo. Draw what? He asks. The pictures carved into the side of the ship? No, he says. It must have been one of the other runners. I never vandalized the Rising's property. I hand up another case. We finish our delivery and head for the ship. As we walk, Indy falls back. I turn around to see her talking to Caleb. He shakes his head. Indy steps closer to him. She's lifted her chin, and I know exactly what her eyes must look like. She's challenging him about something. Caleb shakes his head again. His posture looks tense. Tell me, I hear Indy saying. Now. We should know. No, he says. You're not even the pilot on this flight. Leave it alone. Kai's flying, she says. He had to come all the way here, back to his home province, Do you know how hard that must be? What if you had to go back to Keo, or wherever it is that you're from? He should at least know what we're doing. We're bringing in supplies, he says. That's not all we're doing, she says. He steps around her. If the pilot wanted you to know, he says over his shoulder, you would. You know you're nothing more than a runner, even to the pilot, and he says, he doesn't think of you as his. Caleb takes a step back, and I see hatred on his face for Indy. Because she's right. She knows what Caleb hopes for. It's the dream of every parentless orphan worker of the Rising, to make the pilot so proud that he'd claim them as his own kin. It's Indy's dream, too. Indy finds me later out in the field near the camp. She sits down and takes a deep breath. At first, I think she's going to try to make me feel better by talking about things that don't matter, but Indy has never been very good at that. We could try it, she says. We can make a run for Central if you want. It's not an option, I say. The fighters would shoot us down. You'd try it if it weren't for me, Indy says. Yes, I agree, and Caleb. I'm finished with the selfishness that let me leave everyone behind on the plains and take only Vic and Eli into the carving. Caleb is part of our group. When I fly, he's my responsibility. I can't risk him either. Cassia wouldn't want other people to die just so I could find her. And if the pilot is telling the truth, it doesn't matter. The plague's under control. Everything will be alright soon, and I can find Cassia and we can read together. I want to believe in the pilot. Sometimes I do. Back in camp, when we were training, I say, did you ever fly with him? Yes, and he says simply, that's how I knew he was the pilot, even before they told us. His flying. She stops at a loss for words, and then her face brightens. It was like the picture we saw today carved into the ship, she says. It felt like I was drinking the sky. So you trust him, I ask. Indy nods. But you'd still run the risk of going to Central with me. Yes, Indy says, if that's what you wanted. She looks at me as if she's trying to see inside me. I like her to smile. That beautiful, wide, wise, innocent, devious smile of hers. What are you thinking about? She asks. I want to see you smile, I tell her, and she does. Sudden, delighted, and I grin back. The grass rustles with the breeze. Indy leans a little closer. Her face is radiant and hopeful and raw. It feels like some new hole has been torn in my heart. What's to keep us from flying together? Indy whispers. You and me. I can barely hear her above the wind rustling the grass, but I know the way this question sounds from her. She's asked something like it before. Cassia, I say. I'm in love with Cassia. You know that. There's no uncertainty in my voice. I know, she says, and there's no apology in hers. When Indy wants something bad enough, her instinct is to jump, like Cassia. Indy breathes in, and then she moves. She moves to me. Her hands slide into my hair, her lips pressed against mine. Nothing like Cassia. I pull back, breathless. Indy, I say. I had to, she says. I'm not sorry.